The crystal shattered against the black marble floor with a sharp, violent crack. In the grand mating banquet hall of the Nightfall Court, a single sound was enough to freeze the blood of every noble present. The music died instantly. The hushed conversations of the elite vanished, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. Maeve Sterling did not flinch. She did not cry out, nor did she cower. She simply dropped to her knees on the cold stone, her plain gray servant's dress rapidly soaking up the dark red wine that spread like a bloody stain across the floor. Above her, standing in an elegant gown of spun silver, Lady Morgana offered a delicate, entirely fabricated gasp. "Oh, you clumsy creature," the false Luna murmured, her voice carrying easily in the dead silent hall. Morgana's silver heel was still positioned exactly where she had thrust it out to trip the passing servant. She looked down at Maeve with a gaze full of aristocratic disgust. "Look at the mess you have made before the Alpha King. You are a disgrace to this palace." Maeve kept her head bowed, her expression locked in absolute, unnerving calm. This was her weapon: silence. For 6 years she had survived the shadows of the Nightfall Court by being invisible, by swallowing her pride so her son could eat. She reached out with steady hands, carefully gathering the jagged pieces of crystal. A sharp edge bit into her index finger, drawing a thin, non-graphic line of crimson. She ignored the sting. She did not beg for forgiveness. She did not offer excuses. She just cleaned. But across the grand hall, sitting upon the elevated shadow throne, Alpha King Zale Cross was unraveling. Zale did not care about the spilled wine. He barely registered Morgana's cruel voice. For weeks, a blinding, localized agony had been tearing through his skull, a side effect of the heavy memory suppressants the Elder Council secretly slipped into his drink. They told him his mind was fractured because his true mate had rejected him, leaving his beast feral and broken. They told him Morgana was the only political anchor that could save his reign. But right now, the king felt nothing but the chaotic, murderous rage of his shadow wolf clawing against his ribs, begging to be let out. Zale gripped the carved obsidian arms of his throne. His knuckles turned stark white. He breathed heavily, his chest heaving under his black velvet suit. When he forced his eyes open, the court trembled. The Alpha King possessed heterochromia, one eye as black as a starless night, the other a piercing, luminous silver. Right now, both eyes were bleeding into a dangerous, feral gold. The sharp scent of spilled wine, mixed with the faintest metallic tang of Maeve's blood, hit the air. To a normal wolf, it was nothing. To Zale's beast, it was a spark in a powder keg. A low, guttural growl vibrated from the throne. It was not a human sound. It was the warning of a monster about to break its chains. "Zale, my love?" Morgana faltered, taking a slight step back from the servant on the floor, her confident smirk faltering. The Alpha King did not answer. The shadows in the corners of the banquet hall suddenly detached from the walls. The torches flickered and died, plunging the edges of the room into absolute darkness. The heavy, suffocating weight of an alpha's pure killing intent slammed into the room. Nobles fell to their knees, clutching their throats, unable to breathe. Zale stood up. The obsidian throne cracked under his grip. His shadow wolf did not just emerge, it exploded from him. A massive, terrifying manifestation of pure darkness and teeth materialized around the king, its sheer size dwarfing everything in the room. It snarled, a sound that shook the very foundations of the palace, and lunged down the grand stairs. It was heading straight for the center of the room, straight for the spilled wine, straight for Maeve. Morgana shrieked and scrambled backward, abandoning her royal dignity as she tripped over her silver gown to escape the beast's path. Maeve finally looked up. Her breath broke. For a fraction of a second, the iron walls of her composure shattered. The monster was moving too fast. The heavy scent of pine and rain, a scent that made her heart ache with a buried, agonizing memory, flooded her senses. She braced her hands against the glass-strewn floor, ready to take the impact, ready to be torn apart if it meant keeping the attention on her. "Mama!" A tiny voice cut through the terror. From the shadowed alcove near the servants' entrance, a small figure darted out into the open. "No! Kaelin!" Maeve screamed, the sound tearing from her throat in raw panic. But she was too late. Her 4-year-old son, dressed in a faded, oversized tunic, planted his small feet directly in front of his kneeling mother. He did not run. He did not cry. He raised one tiny, trembling hand toward the massive shadow wolf charging right at them. The court held its breath, waiting for the slaughter. The beast collided with the space just inches from the boy. But there was no impact, no blood, no violence. The massive shadow wolf slammed its front paws into the marble, its claws leaving deep grooves in the stone as it desperately brought itself to a halt. The sheer force of its momentum kicked up a gust of wind that rustled Maeve's wine-soaked dress. The monster stood towering over the tiny boy. Its jaws were parted, its hot breath ruffling Kaelin's dark hair. For a breathless eternity, nobody moved. Zale, standing on the steps halfway down from his throne, froze entirely. The agonizing pain in his head suddenly ceased, replaced by a strange, overwhelming clarity. Slowly, Kaelin tilted his head up to look at the terrifying king. The banquet hall's remaining crystal chandeliers caught the boy's face perfectly. Zale stopped breathing. Staring back at him from the small, determined face of the servant's child were 2 eyes, one as black as a starless night, the other a piercing, luminous silver. Exact, identical, impossible. A sound echoed through the silent hall. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a snarl, it was a whimper. Before the shocked eyes of the entire Nightfall Court, the feral, unstoppable shadow beast of the Alpha King lowered its massive head. Its front legs buckled. Slowly, deliberately, the monster dropped to its knees, pressing its snout gently against the stone floor, right at the tips of the 4-year-old boy's worn-out shoes. It was a posture of absolute, undeniable submission. Zale stared at the boy stared back, and deep within the king's chest, a dormant, heavily drugged bond violently clawed its way toward the light. The silence in the grand hall was absolute, broken only by the low, submissive whine of the shadow beast. Every noble, every guard, and every elder stared in paralyzed disbelief. The Nightfall Court was a kingdom built on fear and strength. Their Alpha King was a tyrant of the dark, a man whose beast yielded to no one. Yet here it was, pressing its terrifying snout against the floor before a 4-year-old child in a worn tunic. Morgana's chest heaved. The false Luna looked from the massive shadow wolf to the little boy, and then she saw it. The entire court saw it. Under the crystal light, Kaelin's eyes, one pitch black, one luminous silver, mirrored the Alpha King's exactly. Whispers erupted like wildfire. His eyes! The beast is bowing. Panic, cold and ugly, twisted Morgana's beautiful face. If the court acknowledged the child, her political crown would turn to dust before it was even placed on her head. "Guards!" Morgana's voice cracked, shrill and desperate. She pointed a trembling, gem-ringed finger at the kneeling servant. "Arrest that woman! She has brought dark magic into this hall. She has bewitched the king's beast." 3 heavily armored guards stepped forward, drawing their silver blades. They moved toward Maeve and the boy. They did not take more than 2 steps. "Stop." The command did not come as a shout. It was a gravelly, dangerous whisper that vibrated through the floorboards. Zale stood rigidly on the steps of the throne. His hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides, his knuckles stark white. The excruciating pain in his skull was blinding, a sharp spike driven behind his eyes by the memory suppressants. But instinct, raw, primal instinct, overrode the drug. The shadows surrounding the beast suddenly snapped out like solid iron whips. They wrapped around the wrists and chests of the approaching guards, hurling them backward. The men crashed onto the marble, their weapons clattering away. It was a bloodless, effortless display of absolute authority. "Do not touch them," Zale breathed, his mismatched eyes locking onto the guards. "Do not take another step." Morgana turned pale. "Zale, my love, she is a witch. Look at what she has done to you." Silence. The word shut Morgana's mouth instantly. On the floor, Maeve did not wait for the Alpha King to rescue her. She did not look at him with gratitude or hope. Slowly, with measured grace, she stood up. The spilled red wine clung heavily to her gray skirt, staining the cheap fabric, but she carried herself as if she were wearing royal velvet. She curled her hand slightly, hiding the bleeding scratch on her index finger within the folds of her dress. She reached down and gently took Kaelin's small hand. The shadow beast whined softly, tilting its massive head, not wanting the boy to pull away. Maeve looked at Morgana. The false Luna shrank back under the servant's gaze. There was no fear in Maeve's dark obsidian eyes, only a cold, ancient stillness. "I have no magic, my lady," Maeve said, her voice perfectly level, ringing clear in the silent hall. "Only a son who is not afraid of the dark." Without waiting for permission, without bowing to the throne, Maeve turned her back on the entire Nightfall Court. She led Kaelin toward the heavy oak doors. As she walked, a phenomenon occurred that made the elders pale. The oppressive, chaotic shadows that Zale had unleashed, the same shadows that usually suffocated the room, parted for her. They cleared a path, lingering near her hem almost reverently. Zale took a step forward. "Wait." He tried to follow. He needed to see the boy's face again. He needed to understand why his chest felt as if a physical chain was pulling him toward the gray-clad servant. But as he descended the final step, a brutal, paralyzing wave of agony struck his mind. Ugh! The elder's drug flared in his veins, fighting violently against the mate bond trying to awaken. Zale stumbled, catching himself on the edge of a marble pillar. He gripped his head, a low groan escaping his lips. Morgana rushed forward, reaching out to support him. "Zale!" The shadow beast snarled viciously, snapping its jaws just inches from Morgana's hand, forcing her to recoil in terror. Even crippled by pain, the Alpha's wolf refused the false Luna's touch. Standing in the shadowy periphery of the hall, Elder Silas watched the heavy oak doors close behind Maeve and the child. His aged face was a mask of cold calculation. 6 years ago, he had burned the archives. He drugged the king. He thought he had erased the low-born scribe from the kingdom's history to secure a pure-blood alliance. He had not known about the child. Silas subtly caught the eye of the captain of the guard, gesturing with a barely perceptible nod toward the corridor. "Follow the servant." The silent command hung in the air. "Do not let them reach the morning." The deepest vault of the royal library was a place forgotten by time. Dust danced in the faint moonlight, filtering through the high, barred windows. The air smelled of ancient parchment, dried ink, and quiet secrets. Maeve sank against the cold stone of the bookshelf, pulling Kaelin onto her lap. Her gray dress, heavy and damp with spilled red wine, clung uncomfortably to her legs. She wrapped her arms around her son, burying her face in his soft hair. Her index finger still throbbed with a dull ache from the shattered crystal, a tiny line of dried blood marking her skin. But it was nothing compared to the violent trembling of her heart. "Are we hiding, Mama?" Kaelin whispered, his mismatched eyes wide and entirely too perceptive for a 4-year-old. "Just resting, my brave boy," Maeve murmured softly. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a delicate, heavy silver ink pen. It was unadorned but gleamed with a faint, otherworldly light. To the rest of the Nightfall Court, she was just a cleaner. But this pen was the last relic of the first scribes, the bloodline tasked with recording the absolute truth of them kingdom. Before Kaelin could reach for the shiny object, the temperature in the vault plummeted. Footsteps echoed softly against the stone. Not one pair, but two. Maeve's grip on the silver pen tightened. From the gloom of the corridor, 2 royal guards stepped into the moonlight. They did not announce themselves. They did not carry torches. Their silver blades were already drawn. Silas had not wasted a single breath. Maeve stood up slowly, pushing Kaelin behind her. She had no sword, only her dignity and the blood of the scribes in her veins. She raised her chin, refusing to show them an ounce of fear. The guards lunged, but their blades never reached her. The shadows stretching across the vault floor suddenly thickened, rising up like solid pillars of black ice. The shadows wrapped around the guards' wrists, violently wrenching their arms back. Their swords clattered harmlessly to the ground. With a sharp, sickening crunch of shifting stone, the shadows hurled both men against the far wall. They slumped to the floor, entirely unconscious. From the pitch-black doorway, Alpha King Zale Cross stepped into the moonlight. He looked terrible. His black velvet suit was disheveled, and he was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. He gripped the edge of a wooden reading table, fighting a visible war inside his own mind. The memory suppressants were actively trying to scramble his thoughts, but the beast inside him was refusing to yield. Zale's heterochromia eyes, one black, one silver, locked onto Maeve, then shifted to the little boy peering from behind her skirt. "Who sent them?" Zale asked. His voice was a harsh, painful rasp. Maeve did not relax. "Your esteemed Elder Silas, I presume. Dead servants cannot speak of what your beast did tonight." Zale winced as another spike of pain drove through his temple. He forced himself to stand straight, fighting to maintain his alpha authority. "My beast is broken. It has been broken for 6 years. It attacks everything, He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Why did it kneel to your son?" "Because your beast is not broken, Your Majesty," Maeve answered. Her voice was ice-cold, devoid of the reverence owed to a king. "It simply recognizes what its king has chosen to forget." Zale stopped, his jaw clenched. "I have forgotten nothing. I was rejected by my mate. I am plagued by a feral mind. That is the history of this court." "That is the history Elder Silas wrote for you," Maeve corrected sharply. She gestured around the vast, dusty room. "You sit on the shadow throne, yet you let corrupt old men write the truth of your own life. You are a blind king, Zale Cross." No one spoke to the Alpha King that way. It was treason. It was a death sentence. Yet Zale felt no anger. Instead, a strange, desperate ache bloomed in his chest. The scent of pine and rain radiating from her was suffocatingly familiar, fighting against the thick fog in his brain. "Who are you?" Zale whispered, taking another step closer. The shadows around him did not threaten her. They curled gently around her wine-stained hem. Maeve stepped back, pulling Kaelin with her. "I am no one." As she moved, her hands slipped. The rest of the High Council sat in the shadows, their faces pale and anxious. "Maeve Sterling," Silas's voice boomed, dripping with false authority. "You are brought before this council on charges of high treason and dark witchcraft. You have bewitched the Alpha King's beast and sought to ruin the royal bloodline. How do you plead?" "I plead that you are a liar, Elder," Maeve answered. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the chamber like a sharpened blade. Morgana stood up, her silver gown rustling. "How dare you speak to the High Council in that tone? You are a low-born servant. Kneel before your Luna and beg for a quick death." Maeve slowly turned her dark obsidian eyes toward Morgana. "I kneel to the moon goddess, and I kneel to the true king. I do not kneel to a thief wearing a stolen crown." A collective gasp swept through the seated elders. Morgana's face flushed a furious, ugly red. "Force her down!" she shrieked. A guard stepped forward, raising his heavy gauntlet to strike the back of Maeve's knees. But before he could make contact, Maeve moved. She did not run away. She surged forward, directly toward the high podium where Elder Silas stood. "Stop her!" Silas yelled, stumbling backward. But Maeve wasn't aiming for the elder. She slammed her hands down onto the open pages of the Royal Chronicle, the sacred ledger that dictated the laws, marriages, and history of the Nightfall Court. From her pocket, she had already drawn the silver ink pen. The small scratch on her index finger from the shattered crystal had reopened. Without a second of hesitation, Maeve pressed her bleeding finger against the glowing silver nib of the pen, mixing her blood with the magic of the first scribes, and drove the tip hard into the parchment. "You cannot erase the truth forever, Silas," Maeve declared, her voice resonating with an ancient, echoing power. The moment her bloodied pen touched the paper, the chamber trembled. The magic of the first scribes, a bloodline sworn to absolute truth, erupted from the pages. The false, rewritten history that Silas had carefully forged 6 years ago began to physically peel off the parchment like dead skin. The black ink hissed and burned, turning into foul-smelling ash that drifted into the air. Underneath the lies, glowing in a brilliant, undeniable silver light, the original text bled back into, existence. The elders leaned forward, their eyes wide with horror and realization as they read the glowing words hovering above the ledger. True mate and Luna of the Nightfall Court, Maeve Sterling. Morgana's name had been completely obliterated. The truth of the king's marriage, the truth of Maeve's identity, was laid bare for the highest members of the court to see. "No!" Morgana screamed, covering her face as if the glowing silver words physically burned her. Silas's face contorted into absolute panic. His life's work, his control over the Alpha King, was unraveling in seconds. If the rest of the kingdom saw this ledger, he would be executed for high treason. "Treason! It is a witch's trick!" Silas roared, his composure shattering entirely. He pointed a trembling finger at Maeve, spit flying from his lips. "Kill her! Strike her down before the magic spreads! Do it now!" The captain of the guard, blinded by duty to the council, drew his massive silver broadsword. He stepped up behind Maeve, raising the heavy blade high above his head, aiming directly for her neck. Maeve did not close her eyes. She did not scream. She kept her bleeding hand firmly pressed against the royal chronicle, ensuring the glowing truth remained anchored to the world, willing to pay for her son's safety with her final breath. The silver blade swung down. The silver blade swung down with lethal speed. It never reached its target. A deafening metallic crack echoed through the chamber. The captain of the guard was violently thrown backward, his heavy broadsword shattering into a dozen useless pieces. Between the guard and Maeve stood a towering, impenetrable wall of pitch-black shadow, harder than steel and colder than ice. The heavy iron doors of the council chamber did not just open, they were blasted entirely off their iron hinges. The massive oak slabs crashed into the center of the room, splintering across the polished floor. Alpha King Zale Cross stepped through the shattered doorway. He was no longer a man struggling against a fractured mind. The agonizing fog of the memory suppressants had been entirely incinerated by the sheer apocalyptic fury of an alpha protecting his true mate. His velvet suit was torn, his breathing heavy, but his posture was absolute. His mismatched eyes, one abyss black, one luminous silver, burned with a terrifying crystal-clear focus. The suffocating, chaotic aura of the Monster King was gone. In its place was the cold, crushing gravity of a true royal ruler. "Kneel," Zale commanded. He did not shout, he did not roar. The single word left his lips with a quiet, lethal finality that carried the full weight of the Nightfall Pack law. Instantly, the air in the room grew heavy, pulling with the force of a collapsing star. The guards collapsed to their knees, their armor clanking loudly against the stone. The younger elders fell forward, gasping for air, as their wolves forcibly submitted to the Alpha command. Elder Silas tried to brace himself against the podium, his face purple, but the Alpha's aura snapped his resistance, driving the old man to the floor. Only Morgana remained somewhat upright, clinging to her carved chair, weeping in raw terror as the shadows crept up the walls around her. And only Maeve Sterling remained standing, entirely unaffected by the king's command. Zale walked past the cowering guards. He walked past the trembling Elder Silas. He did not even cast a glance at Morgana. His mismatched eyes were locked solely on Maeve. He took in the sight of her gray dress stiff with dried wine, the messy strands of her dark hair, the bloody scratch on her finger, still pressing the silver ink pen into the glowing royal chronicle, which illuminated her calm, obsidian eyes. She had been willing to die just to carve her truth back into the world. The impenetrable wall of shadow between them dissolved into fine black mist. Zale stopped just inches from her. The entire court, despite being pressed against the floor, watched in breathless shock as the terrifying Alpha King slowly lowered his towering frame. Zale Cross dropped to one knee before the wine-stained servant. "I am sorry," Zale whispered, the gravelly rasp of his voice breaking with genuine, agonizing remorse. "I let them blind me. I let them steal you. I let you suffer in the dark while I sat on a throne that belonged to us both." Maeve looked down at him. Her heart, frozen for 6 long years, gave a painful, violent thud. He was not making excuses. He was not blaming them, Edrug. He was claiming his failure right here in front of the people who had tortured her. "You promised the darkness would not take us," Maeve replied quietly, her voice trembling for the first time. "And I am here to drag us back to the light," Zale vowed, looking up at her, his silver eye bright with unshed emotion. "No!" A shrill, hysterical shriek shattered the moment. Morgana struggled to her feet, her false Luna crown slipping wildly over her messy hair. She snatched the forged royal decree Silas had drafted from the table, waving it like a shield. "You cannot do this!" Morgana screamed, her face twisted in ugly desperation. "I am your recognized mate. You signed the marriage pact. The temple blessed our union. You cannot strip my title, Zale. Not without proof that the temple acknowledges. A glowing book and a witch's blood are not enough to break a royal marriage." She pointed a trembling, accusing finger at Maeve. "She has no proof of a holy union. I have the decree. I am the Luna." Morgana's hysterical screams echoed against the stone walls, her grip tightening on the forged decree. "I am the Luna! The temple blessed me! You have no proof!" Zale slowly rose from his knee. He did not yell. He simply looked at Morgana with a pity so cold it made her shrink back. Before the Alpha King could speak, the shadows pooling near the shattered doorway began to ripple. The darkness parted, not with violence, but with extreme gentleness, forming a safe, protected walkway. From the shadows, 4-year-old Kaelin stepped into the council chamber. Gasps rippled through the elders still pressed against the floor. The boy's mismatched eyes, one black, one silver, were undeniable. But it was what he carried in his small hands that sealed the court's fate. When Zale had rushed out of the library, he had left the 2 matched halves of the true mating decree on the floor. Kaelin had picked them up. Now the little boy walked past the cowering guards, unaffected by the heavy alpha aura in the room, and stopped beside his mother. He held up the joined parchment. As the air in the room reacted to the truth, the dark rust of the blood signature at the bottom of the page began to glow with the same brilliant silver light as the royal chronicle. The magic of the true bond, undeniable and sacred, hummed through the chamber. "The proof," Zale said, his voice echoing with absolute finality, "has always been mine." The ancient magic of the Nightfall Court responded to the truth. The shadows that had always lingered obediently around the throne suddenly violently rejected the false Luna. They whipped away from Morgana. The heavy, ornate false Luna crown she wore trembled violently before it was forcefully knocked from her head by an unseen pressure. The crown hit the marble floor with a sharp clatter, rolling to a stop right at Maeve's wine-stained shoes. Morgana dropped to her knees, sobbing in total defeat, realizing the kingdom's magic had publicly disowned her. The shadows did not stop there. They swirled gracefully around Maeve and Kaelin, weaving together to form a shimmering dark mantle of royal recognition over her ruined gray servant's dress. The kingdom itself was welcoming its true Luna home. Zale turned his mismatched eyes toward Elder Silas, who was trembling violently on the floor. Elder Silas, Zale's voice was the chilling toll of a bell. For treason against the crown, for the manipulation of the Alpha's mind, and for the attempted murder of the true Luna and the royal heir, you are hereby stripped of your rank, your title, and your wealth. Silas let out a pathetic whimper, burying his face in his hands. Zale turned to the weeping woman beside the podium. Lady Morgana, for conspiring to steal a crown and wearing a forged title, you are banished from the Nightfall Court. If either of you sets foot within my borders again, the shadows will not be so merciful. The king looked out over the rest of the High Council and the royal guards. And the rest of you, Zale said softly, his voice cutting deep into their souls. You allowed my mate to scrub your floors. You allowed my son to hide in the dark. You were complicit in this lie. The heavy Alpha command keeping them down lifted, but not a single person stood up. Instead, the elders, the guards, and the nobility shifted their posture. The fear in their eyes was replaced by profound, crushing shame. One by one they bowed their heads, pressing their foreheads to the cold marble. They were not kneeling because of the Alpha's power. They were kneeling in absolute, pack-level regret. "Forgive us, true Luna," the captain of the guard choked out, his voice thick with tears. "Forgive us," the elders whispered in unison. The entire Nightfall Court was on its knees before a woman in a stained servant's dress. Justice had been served. The false queen was broken. The corrupted elder was ruined. The king was finally awake. Zale turned back to Maeve. The murderous beast inside him was completely silent now, replaced by a desperate, hopeful man. He looked at her, waiting for the relief to wash over her face, waiting for her to step into his arms. But Maeve did not move. She looked down at the false crown at her feet, then up at the Alpha King. Her obsidian eyes were no longer cold, but they were guarded. The deep, agonizing wounds of 6 years could not be erased by a single moment of triumph, no matter how spectacular. "They are kneeling, Zale," Maeve said softly, her voice barely a whisper, meant only for him. "But I am still the woman you forgot. I am still the woman you forgot." Maeve's words hung in the quiet air of the council chamber, heavier than any royal decree. Zale looked at her. He saw the guarded walls in her deep obsidian eyes, walls built brick by brick over 6 years of isolation, fear, and break. Another Alpha might have pulled her into his arms, commanding her wolf to submit to the bond, using the sheer weight of destiny to erase the pain. But Zale Cross was done letting magic and force dictate their lives. He slowly lowered his head, accepting her boundary with absolute respect. "I know," he whispered, "and I do not expect you to forgive me today. I only ask that you stay, not as my captive, but under my protection. Let me prove that the man who made that promise in the dark is still here." Maeve studied his face. She looked at the feral shadow beast, now resting its massive chin gently on her son's small shoes. She gave a slow, measured nod. The Alpha King kept his word. He did not rush her. He did not force a grand, immediate royal wedding to satisfy the politics of the Nightfall Court. Instead, Zale spent the following weeks systematically tearing out the rot in his kingdom. He stripped the corrupt elders of their power, replacing them with wolves who valued truth over bloodline purity. More importantly, he learned how to be a father. The Nightfall Court quickly grew accustomed to a sight that would have been unimaginable a month prior. The terrifying, towering Alpha King could often be found sitting on the floor of the royal library, listening with quiet awe as 4-year-old Kaelin read from the ancient texts. Zale's feral shadow wolf, once the nightmare of the kingdom, followed the little boy like a devoted hound, letting Kaelin bury his small hands in its dark fur. Maeve watched it all. She watched Zale flinch with guilt every time he saw a servant carrying wine. She watched him patiently answer every endless question their son asked. She watched him use his shadows not to intimidate, but to pull a blanket over Kaelin when the boy fell asleep in the gardens. Slowly, the ice around Maeve's heart began to thaw. The scent of pine and rain, once a painful reminder of her loss, became a source of quiet comfort. Zale never pushed, but he was always there, a steady, unmovable shield between her and the rest of the world. It took time, but the bond that had been buried beneath lies and poison finally began to bloom. Deeper and stronger because it was built on choice, not just fate. 2 months later, the Nightfall Court gathered again. Not in the banquet hall, but in the grand throne room. The silver torches burned brightly, illuminating the massive obsidian shadow throne. The court stood in total silence, but this time there was no fear, only profound reverence. The heavy oak doors opened. Maeve Sterling walked down the aisle. She was no longer wearing a wine-stained servant's dress. She wore a breathtaking gown of midnight velvet, woven with silver thread that gleamed like starlight. She did not wear the heavy, gaudy crown that Morgana had coveted. Instead, her dark hair was adorned with a delicate circlet forged from silver, a tribute to the ink pen of the first scribes, the weapon of truth that had saved them all. She walked with the serene, untouchable grace of a woman who had survived the absolute worst of their world and emerged unbroken. Zale stood at the top of the dais, his breath catching in his throat as he watched her. His mismatched eyes, one black, one silver, were filled with an overwhelming, devoted love. As Maeve reached the steps, Zale did not wait for her to bow. He stepped down, offering her his hand. Maeve looked at his outstretched palm. She thought of the cold floors she had scrubbed, the tears she had shed in the dark, and the little boy who had bravely stood before a monster. Then she looked at the man who had burned his own kingdom's corruption to the ground just to see her smile. She placed her hand in his. A warm, radiant shadow swept through the room, washing over the crowd. Zale led her up the final steps. Together, they turned to face the kingdom. From the side of the dais, little Kaelin ran up, his small face glowing with joy. Zale smiled, lifting the boy up so he could stand between them on the royal platform. Kaelin reached out, his tiny fingers wrapping tightly around Zale's hand on one side and Maeve's on the other. The beast inside the king let out a low, rumbling purr of absolute peace. Every elder, every guard, and every noble in the Nightfall Court fell to their knees. This time they did not kneel out of terror, nor out of shame. They knelt in genuine loyalty to the true Luna, who had restored their king's soul. Maeve squeezed her mate's hand, looking out over the kneeling pack. She had once been the silent shadow of this court. Now she was its queen. A crown can be stolen, and history can be rewritten, but the truth of a fated bond will eventually bring an entire kingdom to its knees. Do you think Zale's patience and protection proved he was truly worthy of Maeve's forgiveness? If you love emotional Alpha King stories of rejected mates, hidden truths, and queens rising with dignity, subscribe and come back for our next story.